Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode. I'm very glad you're here. Today we're going to embark on a journey through time, but I warn you, it won't be a pleasant or romantic stroll like those typically shown in Hollywood movies. You're about to discover why your modern life has left you completely defenseless against the brutal reality of European Middle Ages. Yes, I'm talking about you, with your smartphone, your daily hot shower, and your gluten intolerance. You're about to learn why you wouldn't survive even 24 hours in an authentic medieval castle. As we proceed on this journey to the past, I invite you to make yourself comfortable, or rather, uncomfortable, because comfort was a luxury that didn't exist in that era. And if at any point you feel nauseated by the descriptions we'll make, don't worry, it's completely normal. If this journey through the crude medieval reality seems interesting to you, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on which aspect of medieval life would seem most difficult for you to endure. Would you be able to adapt to any of the challenges we'll mention? I assure you that after this episode, you'll never romanticize life in a medieval castle again. Get ready to discover why your modern life has made you completely incompatible with survival in a world that existed just a few centuries ago, but seems like another planet. To understand why your stay in a medieval castle would be so terribly brief, we must first place ourselves in time and space. Our setting is located in Western Europe, approximately between the 12th and 14th centuries, the period many consider the High Middle Ages. This wasn't just any era. Europe was fragmented into countless fiefdoms, counties, duchies, and kingdoms that constantly fought among themselves. War wasn't the exception, but the norm. While the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine, maintained certain splendor in the East, Western Europe lived in a state of constant political turmoil, recurring famines, and devastating epidemics. The feudal system dominated the social structure. At the top was the king, followed by the great feudal lords, knights, clergy, and finally, the vast majority of the population, peasants and serfs, who constituted more than 90% of the inhabitants. Social mobility was practically non-existent. You were born into your station, and you died there. The Catholic Church wasn't simply a religious institution, but the dominant power that controlled education, morality, and even scientific and medical aspects. Its influence was such that it could crown or dethrone kings, and its word was considered infallible. Superstition and fear of hell governed many daily decisions. This period was marked by transcendental events. The Crusades, which sent thousands of Europeans to die in the Holy Land. The Reconquista in the Iberian Peninsula. The expansion of the Mongol Empire that reached the gates of Central Europe. And the devastating Black Plague, which in the mid-14th century annihilated a third of the European population. Life had a very different value than today. Life expectancy hovered around 30-35 years for those who survived childhood, something only about 60% of children achieved. Death was a daily companion, whether from diseases that are easily treatable today, recurring famines, or constant violence. The contrast between social classes was abysmal. While nobles and the high ecclesiastical hierarchy lived in relative luxury, the vast majority of the population subsisted on the minimum, working from dawn to dusk, simply to avoid starving to death. And although castles represented the maximum expression of nobility's power, they weren't exactly the most comfortable places to live. For nobles, a castle was primarily a defensive fortress and a symbol of power, not a palace of comforts. For servants and soldiers, it was a place of incessant work, and for the surrounding peasants, it represented both protection and oppression. The political climate of the era was dominated by constant skirmishes between feudal lords, invasions from neighboring peoples, and internal power struggles. Loyalty was a precious but fragile asset, and alliances changed constantly. Betrayal and poisoning were common political tools. Justice was arbitrary and brutal. Public executions were social events attended by entire families. Punishments included unimaginable tortures, and the concept of a fair trial practically didn't exist. Your luck depended more on your social position and connections than on your innocence or guilt. In this world of extreme contrasts, castles weren't the romantic palaces we imagine today. They were cold, damp, and dark military structures, designed to withstand prolonged sieges, not to provide comfort. Windows were scarce and small to avoid weak points in the defense, which meant gloomy interiors where natural light barely penetrated. This is the scenario to which we'll transport you. A world where hygiene was an unknown concept, where medical science mixed with superstition, where hunger was constant for the majority, and where your life could end at any moment from causes that today would seem ridiculously preventable. You wake up startled. The damp cold has penetrated to your bones during the night. You find yourself lying on a straw mattress that creaks with every movement, infested with fleas, ticks, and other parasites that have been feasting on your blood while you slept. Your skin already shows the reddish marks of their bites, which will soon turn into irritating welts. The darkness is almost absolute. Through a tiny opening in the stone wall filters a faint grey ray of light that barely illuminates the room. Dawn must be breaking, but inside the castle, the difference between day and night is minimal. The penetrating smell of humanity, excrement, and humidity hits you immediately. It's a stench you've never experienced before. A mixture of rancid sweat, fermented urine, and the persistent smoke from torches and hearths. You sit up on your improvised bed and feel how the cold from the stone rises through your bare feet. The temperature inside the castle hovers around 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, even in summer, due to the thick stone walls that never fully warm up. In winter, the cold is so penetrating that you can see your breath forming small clouds in front of you. Around you, the room is devoid of any comfort you would consider basic. There's no bathroom, no shower, not even a sink. In one corner, a simple wooden bucket serves as a chamber pot, overflowing with the night's waste. Its contents will later be thrown from a window or from the battlements, possibly onto some unfortunate passerby. The grey stone walls ooze moisture. In some corners, mold forms green and black patterns that release invisible spores that you breathe with each inhalation. The ceiling is low, with wooden beams blackened by centuries of smoke from torches and tallow candles that emit a greasy, unpleasant smell when burning. Your clothes are rough, woven from coarse wool that scrapes your skin, already irritated by insects. There's no soft cotton, nor the synthetic fibers you're accustomed to. And these garments aren't washed frequently. The concept of daily personal hygiene simply doesn't exist in this era. You hear movement outside your room. The castle awakens with the first bell toll. Servants and workers are already moving, dragging their feet through narrow corridors, carrying water from the central well, feeding fires in the kitchens. The conversations are in a local dialect that you can barely understand, mixed with Latin expressions. The air inside the castle is dense and stale. Ventilation is minimal, as windows are scarce and small, designed for defense, not for comfort. The smoke from torches, candles, and hearths has no adequate exit, so it remains floating in the environment, irritating your eyes and throat. You get up with difficulty. Your body, accustomed to ergonomic mattresses and central heating, protests with pains in joints you never knew you had. The humidity makes your back stiff and your knees creak. Outside, in the courtyard, you hear the metallic sound of weapons clashing. The guards are training or changing shifts. Mixed with these sounds come the squawks of poultry, the occasional neighing of horses, and shouts of orders flying from one side to another. The light entering through the small window brings, with it, dust particles that dance in the air. Through it, you can glimpse a leaden sky, promising another day of intermittent drizzle. The perpetual humidity causes even metals to corrode rapidly and wood to rot in a matter of months. A wooden bowl with murky water awaits you on a small table. It's all the water you'll have to wash with today, and it's not hot, of course. The concept of a daily shower won't exist for several centuries. You'll have to get used to the smell of your own body and that of everyone around you. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you should soon get something to eat. But what awaits you in the communal dining hall is far from being a feast, or even something you would consider edible. Medieval cuisine is a world of strong flavors, strange textures, and dishes that bear no resemblance to your modern diet. You're trapped in a medieval fortress, and your first day has just begun. You're already experiencing sensations and smells that no history book could have prepared you to face. The first minutes of your medieval day have already been a shock to your system, but the real challenges are just beginning, and these will truly test your resistance and ability to adapt. Food will be your first major obstacle. Forget your 3 balanced meals a day. In the castle, most people eat once, perhaps twice, if there's enough. Breakfast, as you know it, doesn't exist. Instead, you'll have to make do with a piece of stale bread from previous days, perhaps soaked in a bit of diluted beer or sour wine to soften it. And yes, beer is consumed from dawn, not for pleasure, but because it's safer than water. The main meal of the day is served around noon. For a common servant or soldier, it will consist of a thick potage of seasonal vegetables, almost always overcooked until transformed into a uniform mass, accompanied by more bread. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions or for the lords. And when there is meat, don't expect lean and tender cuts. The parts you'll consume will be the least appreciated. Viscera, feet, heads. Nothing is wasted. Even if you were a noble, the meat you would consume would be so spiced that you would barely recognize its original flavor, not for culinary refinement, but to disguise the taste of incipient putrefaction in times without refrigeration. Drinkable water is practically non-existent. Wells are often contaminated, especially in large settlements. People drink low-alcohol beer or diluted wine. Both beverages are fermented enough to kill pathogens, but not so much as to cause constant intoxication. Personal hygiene is another formidable challenge. The concept of privacy during bodily functions doesn't exist. Toilets, when available, are simple holes that lead to a pit or directly to the outside of the castle. Toilet paper won't be invented for centuries. Instead, leaves, moss, or if you're lucky, scraps of old cloth are used. A complete bath is an extraordinarily rare event. Most people wash partially, rubbing visible areas with a damp cloth. Communal baths exist in some cities, but they are places of socialization more than effective cleaning. Soap, when it exists, is a caustic product made with animal fat and ash that irritates the skin. Dental problems will be particularly agonizing. There are no effective toothbrushes, toothpaste, or adequate treatments. Bread is full of stone fragments from the mill that wear down tooth enamel. By the time someone reaches 40 years of age, if they reach it, they've lost a good part of their dentition or suffer from extremely painful chronic dental abscesses. Physical. Pain will be your constant companion. There are no effective painkillers. A simple toothache can become endless agony. Fractures, cuts, burns. All these common injuries are treated with primitive and painful methods. Most wounds were cauterized with red-hot irons to prevent infections, a remedy almost as terrible as the disease. Physical work is strenuous and constant. Whether you're a servant, soldier, or artisan, you'll work from dawn until dusk. There are no 8-hour workdays, no weekends, no vacations. The only breaks are the numerous religious holidays. But even then, the basic work to keep the castle functioning must continue. Mobility within and around the castle would be a challenge for your modern body. The stairs are steep, irregular, and dangerous, intentionally designed this way to hinder the advance of attackers. The corridors are narrow and poorly lit. Falls and bruises are part of daily life. And then there are the invisible dangers. Diseases that today we consider minor or easily treatable are potentially deadly. A simple cut can become infected and take you to the grave in a matter of days. Fevers, dysentery, pneumonia, all lurk constantly. Medieval medicine has little to offer beyond bloodletting that further weakens the patient, or medicinal herbs of dubious efficacy. Parasites are everywhere. Besides the fleas and lice you already experienced during the night, there are intestinal parasites that affect almost the entire population. Tapeworms, nematodes, and other intestinal worms are so common that they're considered a normal part of life. And if all this weren't enough, there's the constant danger of violence. Castles are military targets. A siege can begin at any moment, and if it does, hunger, disease, and eventually death will be almost inevitable within its walls. Night brings no rest. Medieval darkness is absolute, a blackness you've never experienced. In your artificially illuminated world, torches and candles provide such dim light that you can barely see a few meters away. And with darkness come ancestral fears, fed by superstition and ignorance. Let's now get into more specific details about aspects of medieval life that would spell your doom in the first 24 hours. Work in a medieval castle is a perfectly oiled machinery where each person has their specific and immovable function. As a newcomer, you would receive the most unpleasant and dangerous tasks. You might find yourself cleaning latrines, a job that involved entering pits filled with human excrement to empty them, exposing yourself to toxic gases like methane that could asphyxiate you in a matter of minutes. If assigned to the kitchens, you would suffer constant burns. Medieval ovens have no temperature regulators or indicators. Everything is done by eye and with a hand inside to feel the heat. Kitchens are smoky infernos where cooks rarely survive beyond 30 years due to chronic respiratory problems and infected burns. As a guard or soldier, the situation wouldn't be better. The armor you imagine gleaming and heroic is, in reality, physical punishment. A complete harness weighs between 25 and 30 kilos, distributed in a manner that's far from ergonomic. After just an hour of patrol, your shoulders would be raw from the friction with the metal. Your knees would tremble from the effort. and the heat inside the metal would be unbearable, with temperatures that can exceed 40 degrees Celsius in summer. The Sea Castle's economy functions with systems that would be completely alien to you. The concept of regular salary barely exists. Most workers receive payment in kind: food, lodging, and perhaps some coins on special occasions. Barter is still common for many transactions. Coins, when used, are a confusing system of different mints with variable values, depending on the region and the moment. A silver penny might buy a loaf of bread or a jug of beer. A gold coin would represent several months' salary for a common worker. But inflation is wild and unpredictable, especially when a lord decides to reissue currency by reducing its precious metal content. Regarding medicine, your basic modern knowledge would simultaneously make you a sage and a heretic. If you tried to explain concepts like germs or the importance of hygiene in preventing diseases, you might be considered a madman, or worse yet, a practitioner of witchcraft. Medieval doctors, when available, based their treatments on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They believe that illness arises from the imbalance between these humours. The most common treatment is bloodletting, which involves extracting blood from the patient, weakening them further when their body is fighting an infection. Wounds are treated with methods that today we would consider barbaric. Amputations are performed without anesthesia, with the patient held down by several men, while the surgeon, usually a barber, saws off the limb and then cauterizes the stump with red-hot iron. Many die from shock or blood loss during the procedure. Most survivors succumb to subsequent infections. Technology is astonishingly basic to your modern eyes. There are no complex machines, not even efficient pulleys in many cases. Human or animal brute force is the main source of energy for any task. A simple nail is a valuable object, individually forged by a blacksmith. A needle is a treasure passed down from generation to generation. Nighttime illumination is extremely costly. Beeswax candles are a luxury reserved for the church and the very rich. Most use tallow candles, animal fat, that smoke, drip constantly, and emit a nauseating odor. Torches burn for a short time and fill spaces with acrid smoke. Fire is both a vital necessity and a constant threat. With wooden structures everywhere, tight constructions without adequate separations, and no fire brigades, a small fire can quickly become an uncontrollable inferno. Many historical castles were destroyed not by enemies, but by accidental fires. Noise is another aspect that would be unbearable for you. A medieval castle is a surprisingly noisy place. Metal against metal, the constant hammering of blacksmiths, shouts of orders, animals, crying children. All this reverberating in stone corridors creates a constant echo that never completely ceases. Silence, as you know it, doesn't exist. Smells would constantly overwhelm you. Besides body odor and excrement, there are the smells of animals living inside or near the castle, the permanent smell of smoke, the stench of meat in various states of preservation or decomposition, leather being tanned with urine and excrement, and dozens of other odors for which your modern nose is simply not prepared. Heating is another critical problem. The great halls have huge fireplaces, but their effectiveness in heating the space is minimal. Heat escapes through high ceilings, while smoke tends to remain inside, creating a toxic and irritating atmosphere. During winter, Most people suffer from what we would today call chronic hypothermia, living in a constant state of cold that weakens the immune system and contributes to high seasonal mortality. During your brief stay in the medieval castle, you might witness or fall victim to events that would profoundly mark any modern society, but which at that time were considered part of the normal fabric of existence. Imagine that your arrival coincides with the beginning of a siege. In a matter of hours, the relatively ordered environment of the castle transforms into organized chaos. The gates close, drawbridges rise, and suddenly, the fortress that seemed spacious becomes a crowded prison. Nearby villages evacuate to the interior of the castle, tripling or quadrupling its population in a matter of days. Medieval sieges weren't brief events. They could last months, even years. The attacker's goal wasn't so much to tear down the walls, something extremely difficult before effective artillery, but to starve the defenders. Very soon, food rations would be reduced by half, then to a quarter. The well water, initially drinkable, would progressively become contaminated due to overpopulation. As weeks pass, you would see how the people around you transform. Chronic hunger causes profound physical and psychological changes. Bodies waste away, faces become skeletal, but most disturbing is witnessing the degradation of morale and ethics. You would see people who previously seemed decent stealing food from the weakest, even from children. Diseases spread with devastating rapidity under these conditions. Dysentery, typhus, and other intestinal infections become epidemics that kill more effectively than enemy arrows. Without antibiotics or real understanding of how diseases spread, each new case is a potential death sentence that multiplies exponentially. In case there isn't a siege, you might witness a public execution. These weren't exceptional events, but regular spectacles with a social function. An execution could attract hundreds or thousands of spectators who considered it both entertainment and a moral lesson. The condemned would be brought in a humiliating procession to the place of execution, usually in the main square, where priests would offer a last chance for confession and repentance. Depending on the crime and the status of the condemned, the execution would be more or less brutal. For minor crimes or lower-class criminals, the gallows provided a relatively quick death, although rarely instantaneous. For crimes considered more serious, especially treason or heresy, methods like quartering, burning at the stake, or the wheel were reserved. These methods were specifically designed to prolong suffering and serve as a graphic warning. Most disturbing to your modern sensibility would be seeing entire families attending these events, including small children, as, if it were a fair, street vendors would offer food and drink, while the condemned suffered their final agony. Another significant event that might occur during your stay would be an epidemic outbreak. Before the understanding of microbial theory, epidemics were interpreted as divine punishments or the result of miasmas, malignant airs. Containment measures were primitive and ineffective. If the disease that appears is the dreaded Black Plague, you would see how the castle divides between those who flee immediately and those who lock themselves in, sealing doors and windows. The symptoms of bubonic plague are especially horrible. Painful buboes, gangrenous inflammations in the groin, armpits and neck, high fever, vomiting blood, and in the pneumonic variant, bloody cough that infects anyone who breathes near the sick person. Death comes in 3 to 5 days of unbearable agony. You would see entire families succumb in a matter of a week. and bodies piling up faster than they can be buried. In contrast to these horrors, you might also witness a celebration or festival. The medieval calendar was full of religious holidays that provided brief respites from the harshness of daily life. An important celebration like Easter or the day of the local patron saint would transform the grim castle into a space of bustling activity. During these festivals, the strict social hierarchies relax slightly. The lord might offer a feast for all the castle's inhabitants, though with tables clearly separated according to rank. Wine and beer would flow more generously than usual, and for a few hours, chronic hunger would be forgotten. Music, dances, and theatrical performances of religious themes would be the main entertainments. Medieval dances would surprise you with their physical energy, with jumps and turns that seem designed to combat the cold rather than for aesthetics. The music, performed with instruments like the hurdy-gurdy, flute, lute, and percussion, would have melodies and harmonies that would sound strange to your modern ears. However, even in these celebrations, death wasn't far away. Excessive alcohol consumption would lead to fights that, in an armed society without effective police, frequently proved fatal. Bonfires and torches necessary for nighttime celebration would cause severe burns and fires, and the brief parenthesis of relative food abundance would cause digestive diseases in bodies accustomed to semi-starvation. These events, both catastrophic and festive, reveal a society that lived constantly on the edge of disaster, where death wasn't an occasional visitor but a daily companion. Your modern psyche, accustomed to safety, predictability, and control, simply isn't equipped to tolerate this reality for long. During your 24 hours in the medieval castle, you would interact with a gallery of characters whose lives and functions would be completely alien to your modern experience. These people, shaped by their era, would seem simultaneously fascinating and disturbing to you. The lord of the castle, probably a count or baron, would be a distant and fearsome figure. Contrary to the romantic image of the chivalrous noble, most feudal lords were brutal warriors who had risen through their ability to kill efficiently on the battlefield. Many barely knew how to read, and their cultural refinement was minimal. Their authority was absolute within their domains, and their temperament could mean life or death for anyone under their power. You would see this man move through the castle like a predator among prey, surrounded by personal guards. His clothing, although expensive, would be surprisingly uncomfortable and impractical. Heavy velvet tunics, smelly furs in winter, and ostentatious jewels that demonstrate his wealth. His hands, far from being delicate, would be covered with battle scars, and his face probably disfigured by some war wound or childhood illness like smallpox. The lady of the castle would contrast with your modern image of a medieval lady. She wouldn't be the ethereal princess of fairy tales, but an efficient and often ruthless administrator. While her husband is absent in wars or at court, she rules the castle with a firm hand. At 30 years old, she has probably survived 10 pregnancies, of which perhaps only 3 or 4 children have reached adulthood. Her body shows the marks of these multiple births without adequate medical attention. Her education would be superior to her husband's, knowing how to read, write, and calculate, skills necessary to administer the castle's economy. You would see her personally supervising the servants, controlling the pantries with almost military precision, and mediating in minor disputes. She would also be an expert in herbal medicine, preparing remedies herself for common wounds and illnesses. The castle chaplain would represent the omnipresent power of the church. This cleric wouldn't necessarily be an especially pious or moral man by your standards. It's common for him to have a housekeeper who is, in reality, his concubine, and perhaps officially unrecognized children. His main interest would be collecting the tithe, ecclesiastical tax of 10% on all production, and maintaining his position of privilege. You would see him presiding over daily masses in the castle chapel, which everyone is obligated to attend. His sermons would be long diatribes in Latin that most don't understand, interspersed with graphic threats about the tortures of hell awaiting sinners. His political influence would be considerable, constantly whispering in the Lord's ear and manipulating events for the church's benefit. The master-at-arms would be another central character, usually a veteran knight too old for active combat, but valuable for his experience. His body would be a map of scars and poorly healed injuries. He might be missing an eye, some fingers, or even a complete limb, replaced by a rudimentary prosthetic replacement. This man would spend his days training young squires and soldiers in the brutal art of killing efficiently. His teaching methods would be incredibly harsh by modern standards, including regular beatings as lessons to strengthen the apprentices. Despite his roughness, he would have a strict code of honor and would be one of the few who would dare to speak frankly to the feudal lord. Among the servants, the head cook would occupy a surprisingly important position. In an era where poisoning is a common political tool, controlling food preparation means having power over life and death. She would generally be an older woman who has survived decades in the hellish medieval kitchens. Her culinary knowledge would be limited by your gourmet standards, but her ability to preserve food and make almost rotten ingredients edible would be impressive. You would see her shouting orders to an army of kitchen helpers, children of barely 6-7 years who work 14-hour days among fires, knives, and boiling cauldrons. The figure of the healer or barber surgeon wouldn't be missing. Generally a marginal character with medical knowledge that mixes superstition, medicinal herbs with real effects, and brutal but occasionally effective procedures. He would be simultaneously respected for his knowledge and feared for his association with suffering and death. His methods would horrify you. Dental extractions without anesthesia, trepanations, holes drilled in the skull, to release the demons, causing epilepsy or migraines, amputations performed in minutes with manual saws. However, among these barbarities, you would find some surprisingly effective treatments based on centuries of empirical observation, such as certain antimicrobial ointments made from mold, accidental precursors to penicillin. Among the less privileged, inhabitants of the castle would be the servants, an anonymous mass of people whose lives pass in exhausting work from childhood to premature death. 5-year-old children carrying water or cleaning stables. 20-year-old women who look 40 due to incessant work and multiple childbirths. Men with permanent deformities caused by work accidents without adequate treatment. A character you might possibly see, though rarely mentioned in romantic accounts, would be the castle fool. In an era without understanding of mental illnesses or cognitive disabilities, people with these conditions frequently became a cruel form of entertainment. This individual would be dressed in ridiculous clothes, subjected to constant mockery, and treated hardly better than a domestic animal. Outside the castle walls, but fundamental to its existence, would be the peasants who work the surrounding lands. They would live in miserable huts with a single room shared with their animals. Their diet would be even poorer than that of the castle servants. Basically, oatmeal or rye porridge, black bread, and vegetables grown in small gardens, with meat perhaps once a month. These peasants would deliver between a third and half of all their production to the feudal lord as tax, in addition to the tithe to the church. You would see them working from dawn to dusk, using primitive wooden tools with iron tips, constantly on the verge of famine. A bad harvest would mean certain death by starvation for many. Each of these characters has been shaped by a world of normalized brutality, superstition instead of science, and a fatalistic resignation to suffering that would seem alienating to you. Your attempts to communicate effectively with them would clash against cultural barriers as formidable as the castle walls themselves. After this journey through the 24 hours you wouldn't survive in a medieval castle, it's time to reflect on what we've discovered. We've seen how every aspect of daily life in the Middle Ages would represent an insurmountable challenge for a modern person. From the moment of waking up on a parasite-infested pallet, through meals you would barely recognize as food, to the absolute darkness of nights without artificial lighting, each hour would be a test of your physical and psychological resistance. The non-existent hygiene, the permanent cold, the constant physical pain, untreated diseases, exhausting work, and normalized violence would create an environment in which your modern mind, accustomed to comfort and safety, would simply collapse. The characters who inhabited these castles, from the feudal lord to the lowest servant, lived in a conceptual world so different from yours that meaningful communication would be almost impossible. Their values, beliefs, and life expectations would seem as alien to you as if they were from another planet. But perhaps the deepest lesson from this journey to the past is to appreciate how much humanity has advanced in relatively little time. What would be intolerable conditions for us was normality for the vast majority of our ancestors for millennia. The most basic luxuries of your daily life, potable water, painkillers, artificial lighting, controlled heating, would be inconceivable miracles even for the most powerful medieval nobles. This contrast invites us to reflect. What aspects of our current life, which we consider normal or even deficient, will seem barbaric and intolerable to future generations? How will our descendants judge our way of treating the environment, our justice systems, or our medical methods? And as you return to your comfortable 21st century reality, with your smartphone, your refrigerator full of food from around the world, and your private bathroom with hot water on demand, allow yourself a moment of gratitude for having been born in this era and not that one. You'll no longer have to romanticize medieval castles or dream of being a knight or a court lady. The historical reality, as you've seen, is far from fairy tales. Until then, don't forget to value those modern small luxuries that, in reality, are extraordinary advances that have radically transformed the human experience. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey to the past. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which aspect of medieval life surprised you the most? Do you think you would have survived more than 24 hours?